When the Sun opposes Pluto once a year, we're invited to face patterns of power and control, obsession and abuse, and to the degree to which we are willing and able to transform around those subjects. But this year, the Sun-Pluto opposition is happening conjunct Jupiter next to the Sun at 6 degrees, while the Sun is opposing Pluto at 4 degrees between Leo and Aquarius. And that Jupiter, Sun, and Pluto are now all involved with sextiles and trines to Uranus and Neptune at the same moment. Since Leo is ruled by the Sun, there's an extra emphasis on the father wounds that this opposition is forcing us to face at this time. Some Pluto interactions are actually really wonderful creative times where purging and a clarification of what belongs to us and what belongs to our fathers, our grandfathers, solar figures, and the paternal lineage of our ancestry that might have been unconscious, Pluto, or temporarily unconscious until this moment. There's a tremendous opportunity to meet in real time our personal ambitions and our mission, the Sun, the reason we're here, and the conflict between that and those underworld forces that are really difficult to comprehend and wrestle with. And as Ren Butler puts it in his book, The Archetypal Universe, Goethe is quoted as saying, "Where there's strong shadow is where there is much light." And we will be asked at this time, what will we utilize in our will, the Sun, to move towards what actually is healthy for us? And that might actually involve surrender and telling ourselves the truth and allowing ourselves to face that truth with a tremendous amount of courage and wisdom, Jupiter in Leo, that's given to us at this time. Hi, I'm Amy Rose White. I'm an integrative psychotherapist of nearly 20 years, and I'm also a counseling astrologer making videos on self-healing for the archetypal symbols of the astrological movements at hand. See all my free healing guides and my Chiron and Taurus healing kit and links to book with my limited availability in August. Those books are now open. That's all linked below. So Plutonian symbolism, because it's related to the underworld, to hidden material, the subconscious realm, is often associated with addiction and addictive processes. That can mean substances, that can also mean processes like shopping, gambling, alcoholism, and workaholism, especially with the Sun, and sexual addictions or the misuse of sexual power and manipulation in ways that are destructive to both others and self. So this moment is a rather heavy time, perhaps acknowledging where our fathers, our grandfathers, and other paternal influences in our ancestral lines have shown up in our own lives, or perhaps in the partners and even friends that we choose, and where our own obsessional thinking and patterns of behavior distracts us from our own repressed pain, our own repressed fear, both of those are Pluto, and from the terror, also Pluto, of perhaps being engulfed by the emotions that we might not have had a safe holding environment as children to learn how to handle and integrate into our little bodies. Mercury is still in Cancer, and he's going very slow as he's just stationed direct in the last week. And Saturn's in that superior square by a few degrees to that Mercury from Aries to Cancer. So that further emphasizes where we might have felt constricted, restrained, or limited in dysfunctional ways by fathers. Perhaps there was a coldness or a distance, that's Saturn, and a lack of communication to Mercury, if that existed for us, which is a pretty common personal attribute for fathers of a certain age, to not communicate openly and clearly. And that relationship between the need for connection that wasn't met and the processes that we later engage in, or the people around us that we engage with to meet that need to be seen and heard, to meet the need to communicate, simply talk and share, and to be known, to meet that need for verbal connection. Uranus is in Gemini, and words of affection can really be highlighted. And if our father was in an addictive process of any kind, the question is not does it live in us, but how does that live in us somewhere? And how is that running and maybe winning, taking the lead in our lives right now? And what do we need to do? Sun and Leo, courage, ambition, and Jupiter conjunct the Sun with the wisdom and insight that might be available to us right now. How can we find safe spaces to face those underworld forces that are against us right now and be honest with ourselves? That is Pluto's greatest gift, actually, is to help us stop lying, to face the lying in ourselves and with others. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we confront people who have active addictions who are lying to themselves, or people whose addictive processes have really influenced us in the past, if that's not going to serve us in any meaningful way. But it could. But it certainly means acknowledging, at least within ourselves, and perhaps within our immediate family and friends, where addictive thinking is getting in the way of true relating and emotional availability in our own current relationships. Because that is almost always a consequence of having any parent, father or otherwise, dealing with an addiction. But right now, solar figures are heightened and focused on at this time because emotional disconnection is always a consequence of having one parent, whether it's mother or father, in that addictive process and another parent dealing with that addictive process. And of course, some people have both. An argument can be made that the parent that's dealing with the person in the more obvious addiction also has addictive thinking of their own. And if you're interested in me talking more about addictive processes and astrological aspects, let me know. So in those dynamics, there is not a safe place for the child's emotional world to be focused on. No one in that dynamic seems to know what to do with their own emotions in a healthy way, much less honor and hold and help the child process them. So we're left at this time with really examining Mercury squaring Saturn with what stories in our minds are still running our show around our decisions, around closeness, around emotional expression, and around our own identity. Sun, Jupiter in Leo. Did we define ourselves and go into a specific career to get our father's emotional connection and approval, finally? Or to be seen in ways that we couldn't because he was too preoccupied by whatever was going on, and whatever we did we feel like maybe if we were just perfect enough or we were high achieving, or we had a mom that was just trying to function and keep the house afloat while dad worked extremely long hours. That can be an addictive process. Did we engage in those things related to paternal and maternal addictive processes that shaped allow ourselves and the limitations that we place on ourselves? And if so, how is that working for us right now? Is it effective? How is it affecting our health, our body, our emotional lives, our connections? Are we modeling the same thing right now for our kids? How do we feel about emotional intimacy? Pluto, Jupiter, the sun being seen. No one wants that dark, murky stuff to be seen. No one wants to be under a floodlight, the sun, with their sexual habits, their sexual proclivities, and what one might call sexual deviance or true deviances to be recognized. And of course, in the collective and even in our families, things around sexual power and the misuse of that power, really those dark, unpleasant nature of Plutonian archetypes might be something we really have to face. Because we've all turned to something to manage our vast emotional world, despite most of us having very little of what we call in mental health a holding environment for such experiences. And that's why we have to turn and manage on our own to often addictive thinking and processes. We've had to wing it on our own. And so, of course, many of us often reach for our own addictions, even if they're mental. Maybe it's shopping, maybe it's not cocaine or meth or alcohol, maybe it is, maybe it's just a few beers every night, and we tell ourselves it isn't that big of a deal. But we're essentially numbing ourselves from connecting to the depth of our own soul and our own heart. That's Pluto. And a Pluto-Sun opposition actually brings into focus where we have more power than we might think to face that material, to feel the things that were not safe to feel when we were young, and to find guidance and experience guidance in safe spaces, both in teachings, Jupiter, and in groups, that's Pluto and Aquarius, and in guides, coaches, healers, mentors, Jupiter at this time. And so that's the really good news. That saying, when the student is ready, the master appears, something like that. This is a moment where we may very well come into contact with the people, places, and the spaces that are actually healing and helpful right now, for bringing that emotional safety into our lives in ways that we might not have known ever. And I'm saying this whether you're 20 or 70 or 90, this could be happening for you right now. We're at a time where we must face our own need to obsessively focus on our will, Sun Pluto, for our lives, our own ambitions, our own sometimes ruthless drive for success, for achievement and fame and power. Even if no one knows about that, maybe only you know what's driving you in your mind. So this is a symbolic moment of recognition of our inner power struggles around such things. So the solution here in the opposition, conjoined by Jupiter, is influenced by the almost perfect square between Venus and Mars. And I'm going to talk a lot about those influences in my next video on the full moon in Aquarius because it's remarkable. So the help the Venus-Mars square provides is in the healthy recognition that something must change around our will, Mars, and our ability to allow and receive, Venus. That's where the surrendering part comes in. And the square forces something to move. Do we keep muscling through an inner war and pretending that's not there? Or do we find new ways of thinking and relating that actually bring harmony and serenity? In the recovery world, in AA and Al-Anon spaces, Al-Anon is a group for family and friends of alcoholics and people who deal with other substances. The very first step we work on is recognizing that our lives have become unmanageable. Now, nobody loves that step. The first step is the hardest. Nobody loves hearing that when we first come to this work. Nobody wants to recognize that we actually are only in charge of some things in our lives, our thinking and our behavior. And that when we are feeling emotionally out of control, our lives have become unmanageable. They actually always were, but addictive thinking leads us to believe that we can manage not just us, but everyone around us. And so the question at the time of this opposition is, are we going to keep forcing our will, the sun with Pluto, or are we going to trust Jupiter, that we're guided by something larger than us? It is my will versus the divine will at this moment. And surrendering to the divine will is the empowered approach at this time. And that Saturn in the superior square to Mercury is also an empowered approach to our thinking. I'm willing to accept that my life has become unmanageable. You don't have to engage in a 12-step program to do that. But if you are affected by addiction of anyone in your life or yourself, someone you care about, a friend, doesn't have to be a father, it's a highly imperfect program. It's peer run, so it's imperfect because it's run by human beings. And the core tenets of 12-step work, in my observation, long-term of working in addiction and mental health, is that it gets people in the right direction around loosening that control of where we falsely owned it. You know, I have to have that thing, or I have to avoid that feeling. I have to get more of this sensation or that emotion, whether it's drugs or shopping or sex or love, whatever, you know, just constantly, or maybe just constantly being around people. Maybe we're addicted to busyness, never resting, never relaxing, never letting our minds get quiet enough to face our own internal turmoil. You know, am I willing to acknowledge that I've reached a point that is doing me more harm than good in that avoidance behavior? This can be a really powerful time to seek help, to do the really deep work in therapy or psychotherapeutic spaces, to use art therapy, dance therapy, movement, somatic work. You know, Pluto is very body focused, and so is Jupiter, Venus, and Mars. You know, really much about staying connected to our internal experiences. That trauma, which is really the underlying unifying factor with addiction, keeps us from staying in connection with. As trauma survivors, we're often not in our body. And there's usually rage related to our traumas that are connected to addiction, Mars and Pluto. And there's usually a broken heart, Venus, that's involved there. Oh, and what do we need at this time to soothe some of those wounds? Do we need to write letters to our fathers, our grandfathers? Do we need to pray to our ancestors? Do we need to do a forgiveness ritual to the men in our lives where we've been touched and deeply affected by their addictions? Do we need to write a letter of forgiveness to ourselves for our own ways we've showed up in a similar coping strategy? Do we need to go spend more time in nature? Do we need a more serious intervention beyond 12-step groups and sponsors and therapists? Do we need some kind of inpatient program to really go through the traumas related to our own addictions and what we've survived? Time in nature is always going to be one of the antidotes if those higher level things aren't. I've probably talked about this in every other video because, you know, Venus is in Virgo, South Node's from Virgo. Venus is not comfortable there, but it is an earth sign. Chiron's in Taurus, an earth sign. You know, places where there's areas of discomfort and wounding right now are often going to be nourished by not staying too much in the mind. I made a short recently about all the fire and air energy and how it leads to combustion. So there could be outbursts at this time. You might really want to yell some of this stuff to someone, and someone might want to yell at us. So we're certainly going to see that out on the street and out in the world. So be careful, you know, take extra caution in this end of July into August and really into the whole eclipse season at the end of the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, because this first eclipse is a big one and lots of these planetary movements are kind of baked into it as well. So know that there is a different way to process and experience a trauma and emotional experiences that are disintegrated in us, Pluto, and things we might consider dark Pluto. But as adults, we can learn, that's the beauty of age, that across from another human being, no emotion can kill us. Across from an open heart, our emotions actually become our friends. Even those that felt so overwhelming, we thought we could never tolerate them and survive it. So your meditation and reflection for this transit is, how have I inherited some addictive thinking from my family? And how is that showing up in my life now? And that's often going to be around the limited tolerance for uncomfortable feelings or experiences. Your mirror work for the transit is, you have the power to become your own healthy father now. And your mantra for the transit is, I surrender my will to the divine. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for commenting, liking, and sharing my work. Thank you to those of you who I've gotten to work with since deciding to open up about my love of astrology and mental health on this channel. It is a great joy and pleasure for me. See my booking links below and these videos above, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.